Hi everyone. Is my face covered? Can I roll this back? Short problems. Okay. So I'm currently a PhD candidate at Brown University, and today I'll be sharing some very cool work with my collaborators, Josh Yang, Vivian Chan, Jiwon Chung, and Jeff Huang, on PortalInk, a web-based illustration tool which allows artists to create 2.5D SVG-based visual stories using Parallax and Waypoint transitions. So this project was motivated by the idea that in visual art, there's usually an expectation of what flat 2D art versus model 3D art looks like. For example, maybe we associate 2D with something that's more painterly and 3D with something that's more smooth. However, when these spaces are crossed or blended, then there's almost a sense of wonder as we are encouraged to reevaluate our preconceived notions. So here I have two examples that do this with contrasting effects. The first is a scene from the Riot movie Arcane, which has these beautiful hand-painted backgrounds that are juxtaposed against 3D models, creating almost a gritty and grounded effect to an otherwise cartoonish style. And then on the right-hand side, this is a drawing that was made using Memento Canvas, which places 2D assets within a 3D scene, and instead it adds this almost cartoonish effect to a scene that's otherwise more realistic. But in practice, making these 2D to 3D blended experiences within illustrative storytelling is difficult. It often requires spatial reasoning between 2D and 3D spaces. So, for example, when you're creating these 2D objects that would be placed in a 3D scene, you have to think about how that asset will look like from all angles. In addition, because we're focusing on creating a cohesive story, we also have to think about whether the progression of the story would make sense in the context of how a viewer may spatially navigate through the scene. And lastly, this is more of an observation of existing tools, but current 2D to 3D kind of stories usually require additional software for the users to fully experience them. And so to remedy these issues, we can create a tool that first remains strictly within the 2D space in terms of authoring, but can still create things that look 3D. In addition, we can also map spatial navigation to narrative strategies that are common in storytelling, as well as embed these multiple interactions within a standalone file. So this leads us to our tool, PortalInk, which kind of has two main features. The first is these parallax layers that can generate a sense of pseudo-depth as the user pans and zooms around, and also a waypoint and port mechanism that challenges the user's notions of space. So I'll be going briefly over how these mechanisms work. So imagine you have a set of layers, which is common in any sort of drawing tool, and we model these layers as group objects within the SVG. Then we allow users to set depth values to these layers, which then dictate how far away that scene is perceived to be. In addition to depth, each layer is also associated with their own respective scale factors, as well as X and Y translations that can be set by the user. Then we model the layers as stacked planes viewed by a perspective camera pointing down into the stack. The viewer has its own panning position, X and Y, as well as its own current depth. Then the scale factor of each layer is then a function of the viewer's current depth as well as the layer's user-specified depth. That means the layers that are further away from the user would then look smaller as well as move slower. So when the user draws a stroke on a selected layer, for example, the second one here, we apply the same transformation that's applied to the layer to all the subsequent mouse operations. Then as the user zooms in and the camera moves deeper into the scene, we then adjust the relative depth and we calculate the scaling factors of each layer. And then if the relative depth of the layer is less than 0, then the depth is hidden, as you can see in the first one. Okay, so here's an example of that parallax functionality in action. We also update the selected layers dynamically on zoom so that the current layer being drawn on is always visible. Next, we also support a waypoint portal functionality that allows users to save different views of the canvas as a waypoint and teleport to these locations via portal. In the code, these waypoints are stored in the SVG as a pattern element, which has its own kind of image URL that the paths can refer to generate a preview of that portal. So any closed path, essentially, that the user draws could be a portal and linked to a waypoint. And then when the user zooms in, there are kind of two ways that a portal can be triggered. The first is if the bounding box of the viewer is within the bounding box of the portal on all four sides, or if the cursor is within the bounding box of the portal as you're zooming in and the current viewer depth crosses the layer depth of the portal. Then we use CSS animations to morph the waypoint preview to the entire canvas viewer. So here again is a video of that in action. The person saves that location of the cat in the module, and then they link it to the portal of the yarn, the ball of yarn. And as they zoom in, it'll like morph them back to that location. Okay, so our system also supports multiple interactions surrounding these two Parallax and Portal functionalities. So we can kind of switch between this traditional 2D and 2.5D view. This is the kind of portal and waypoint function that I mentioned earlier. So you can kind of save waypoints to this bottom right module. You can click on each of them to teleport you directly there on the canvas. And then, of course, you can link the waypoints to any portals and then teleport them as you see fit. Okay, and then also for the layers, it's pretty similar to any kind of drawing tool, right? You can add layers, you can merge layers. So the default, if you add a layer in between two different layers, it will set the default depth value to an average of the in-between layer depths, but of course the users can change them as they see fit. And then lastly, all of these interactions are embedded as JavaScript within the exported SVG file. So this results in standalone interactive SVGs that can be experienced on any modern browser. So we created our system using a longitudinal participatory study with 3 artists, each of whom used the tool for 3 months each to create their own comics. So because the tool was actively being developed with the case study, the parallax effect was created during this process, and then the portal mechanism at the end kind of inspired by their thoughts during the process. So all of the artists came in with their different backgrounds, as well as different goals that they wanted to achieve using the tool. So artist A mainly wanted to create a linear storyline that traced the development of characters over time. So the main way that artist A used Parallax was actually to separate the layers into semantic substructures. For example, separating into these like decorative foregrounds, primary and secondary subjects, as well as a flat background. And she did this for each of her separate scenes. And also during the process, she was kind of playing around with these different color palettes and tones to apply to the scene. For example, this kind of sharp, saturated night scene on top with the mother bird and their eggs, versus the more soft pastel scene on the bottom. And she couldn't really decide which one she liked best. And so then this kind of led to a discussion into perhaps we need to support multiple branching paths so that the users themselves can choose on which kind of style or tone they prefer better. In contrast to artist A, artist B instead wanted to explore the idea of self-contained mini-stories that are embedded within a larger non-linear narrative. So after some initial sketching, her final comic settled on an exploration of an ant colony in which each chamber in the colony had their own stories happening simultaneously. In this context, Parallax was more used as a blocking mechanism to kind of obscure and reveal each self-contained mini-story. However, so one difficulty that she encountered was that her narrative was still constrained by space, as the viewers had to physically pan around to kind of these adjacent panels to continue the story. So it wasn't truly non-linear in that sense. And then finally, artist C was much more interested in how the intentions or story progressions of characters can be revealed by interactions on the viewer side. So she created several different stories to explore this idea. For example, in the cat scene, Parallax was used to generate these like playful bounce animations that reveal the cat's personality. In the Snow White scene, it was more used to kind of map Snow White's emotional journey, which is also like mapped to the seasons analogy. And then in the reading scene, Parallax was actually used to create these fake portals that contrasted the snowy scene outside against the boys' like desires for a warmer summer inside. So altogether, motivated by artists' desires to both incorporate these multiple variations of scenes, remove the spatial constraints of authoring, as well as to provide more ways to indicate character intention, we developed this portal mechanism that can be slotted into our existing SVG Parallax paradigm. So like I mentioned, the portal implementation was finished at the end of the case studies, so the artists didn't actually have a chance to incorporate them into their illustrations. And we felt that asking them kind of to add them post hoc, despite all their planning in the beginning was kind of ingenuous. So we also provide a gallery in our paper that kind of focuses on this exact usage of portals to explore other applications for them beyond comics. Some of these applications include playing with portal interactions on text now instead of the drawn strokes. You can like zoom into the different text, which like teleports you to a different paragraph in the drawing, or using the portals as proxies for a website hyperlink. So imagine on the website, instead of clicking on any link, and maybe zoom in and it jumps you to a different page. Or even using the portals as presentation transitions. So this is kind of reminiscent of Prezi, which was kind of popular a couple of years ago, but fell off. Okay. So overall, with both the Parallax and Portal functionalities working together, we were able to support sort of diverse forms of both narrative and spatial linearity. And the second finding was that in practice, when using these features to create visual stories, there were also other pretty cool use cases. Like, for example, on the Parallax side, this feature could help artists better create visual groupings by setting larger depth differences between layers. And then other surprising use cases also include using the depth differences to author perspective shifts and also pseudo-animations. And on the Portal side, we found that it could be an effective way to provide choices for viewers to select shifts in style or tone that they prefer, or even be used as proxies for a mouse click that's more continuous or granular. Yeah, that's PortalInk. Again, everything is completely web-based and can be kind of interactive on most modern web browsers except for Safari. And the source code of the Parallax and Portal interactions are also open source at that GitHub link. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for the great talk. If you have a question, please come up to the mic. And while people are getting up, I'll ask a question. It's really beautiful, really fun. I wondered, for somebody who is experiencing this for the first time and is kind of opening up this story, is it always clear how to navigate it, where the portals are? I guess, what is it like for somebody who created it compared to somebody who is seeing it for the first time?
Right. So there's no like on the interaction, there's no like indicators for like where a portal is located. From when our artists were using it, they kind of like indicated through like context. So like, oh, if there's like a mirror in the Snow White scene, for example, like you're expected to like zoom into the mirror. So it's like we want it to be, I guess, more subtle instead of like slapping on a big annotation that says like go here or like go over there. But yeah, I think it'd be cool to like explore like more like subtle interactions to kind of hint at kind of portal locations, but not have it like in your face.
Agreed. Any other questions? No? I have one last question in that case. What were some of the limitations? Oh, someone came up. Great. Go ahead.
Sorry. Hi, I'm David Little from Autodesk Research. First of all, amazing system. It's so cool. It's so fun to watch. Yeah, I was intrigued by the thought of like traditional animation and 2D, and I don't know if you're familiar with Toon Boom Harmony, but they had some elements of that sort of like pseudo 3D fake planes. And yes, I wanted to just get your thoughts on applying this for animation beyond these sort of like endless canvases for storytelling.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of like one of our artists kind of did something similar, like that. They like used the pan interaction to like move the layers around, and because like the depth differences were different, then like maybe the head like moves a little faster, and that was like a little bit fun. We haven't explored too deeply into the animation aspect, but I imagine that future work like could touch on maybe like thinking about what new interactions we could create with these like parallax effects. But, yeah.
Thank you.